Okay, good morning. It's 10:40. Yeah, 10:41. So a little bit late for my 10:30 class, but not bad, because if you consider my normal attendance to the classes that I give at Beis Medrash Lenoshim, I usually am much later. Now, Rabbi say, if you're on Facebook, I put up the Maamar last night. I called it, it's a mistake. The name of the Maamar is Basukos Tashvu, and I also sent it out in the WhatsApps. Anybody who belongs to my broadcasts, where I send out all my classes, I sent out this Maamar as well. I didn't put it up yet on the website because I didn't edit last night's class yet. But it's available on Facebook, the PDF, if you want to follow inside, and if you belong to one of my groups. If anybody wants to get all my classes, just send me a WhatsApp notice. I'll join you to the WhatsApp group, and then I'll send you classes all the time. All the classes that are new that I put up, I send, and then you would have received this PDF as well. We're learning a Maamar from the Rebbe, which the Rebbe said, Erev Chag Sukkos Tashvu, and then he edited the Maamar Erev Shmini Atzeres on the Shana Rabbah of the same year, Tafshin Lamed Ches. It's a long Maamar. And what the Rebbe does in this Maamar is that he explores all the Yom Tevim, beginning with Rosh Hashanah, Seres Yom Yom Kippur, Sukkos. And in Sukkos he breaks it up into the Sukkah, the Lulav, and Simchas Beis Hashayeva. And he even mentions Shmini Atzeres. It's very, very reminiscent of the Maamar of Vekocha from the Rebbe Marash. But I told you yesterday that the Nekud of this Maamar, which we're going to be learning this morning, is about Oshon, Ayin Shun Nun, which stands for the abbreviation of Olam Shana Nefesh, time, space, life. Reality is defined by Oshon. The point of the Maamar is going to be that there's something called Achas. Achas means Yechido, Achas means Etzem of Alakus. Achas means the essence of godliness, and how Achas is Nimshach into Oshon. How you have Achas in Olam, that means in space. You have Achas in Shana, that means in time, and you have Achas in Nefesh, that means in life, Yechido. And of course, Yom Kippur is naturally connected to Oshon and to Achas. The Kohen Gadol is Nefesh, the Yom Kippur is time, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim is space. But the Rebbe wants to say that this is true also of Rosh Hashanah, and it's true also of Sukkos. So the idea is that there's three things. Reality, creation, is defined by three, and the Achas is bringing the Atzmas of Elokus into the creation. Now, I mentioned yesterday that I would talk about this morning this whole question of Oshon. It says in my Morim, based on a quote from the Tzemach Tzedek, as far as I remember, that Al Shloisha Yonim Elu Nivnis Kol Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah revolves around three principles: Olam, Shana, Nefesh, and everything in Sefer Yetzirah goes in three: V'Sefer, Asfar, V'Sipur, Ksav, Michtav, and Koisev, and so on. And of course, the beginning of it is Emesh, Aleph, Mem, Shin, which is the abbreviation for Aver Mayim Esh, or Eish Mayim and Ruach. If you know the Sefer Yetzirah, and I don't know it well, but I've glanced through it, he divides the 22 letters into three groupings: Shalosh Oimois, three mothers; Sheva Kfulis, 7 double letters, and Yud Beis Pshutos, and 12 single Oisias. All of these ideas, of course, are explained in Chassidus at that length. The Shalosh Oimois, the three mother letters, are Aleph, Mem, and Shin, which stand for Avir, which means Ruach, and Mayim, which means water, and the Shin stands for Eish, for fire. Eish, Ruach, and Mayim. And of course, this Emesh, these three Aleph, Mem, Shin, are consistent with Oshon, with Olam, Shana, Nefesh that we're talking about here. In other words, Sefer Yetzirah, everything goes in three. In other Kabbalah, everything goes in 4, Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. And of course, in Chassidus, everything goes in 5. You have Yechida, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida, or Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei, and the crown, the Koitzesh Yud, like it says in Igeres Tshuva Perek Daled, and the Rebbe talks about it in his Siches on Igeres Tshuva Perek Daled V'chuli. Now, these are three different models of Kabbalah. A model of Kabbalah that everything goes in 3, a model of Kabbalah that everything goes in 4, and a model of Kabbalah that everything goes in 5. I'm not enough of a maven to explain all of these and to explain the difference between the three and explain the similarities between the three. But I have opinions. I have netiyas. I don't know for sure, but I have certain feelings about it. I just want to talk about the Sefer Yetzirah and the number 3. Okay, Emesh, Alver Ma'emesh. And I want to start this way. In other words, I'm giving you a lecture now. I'm giving you an introduction, which is not in the Maimed. I'm just using this Maimed as an excuse to share an idea with you. It says in Ein Beis, based on a Zohar, that koil, a voice. I gave a shiur 2 hours ago on shofar, and shofar is a koil, is a voice. Is made up of emet, eish mayim and ruach. Voice, halachically, koil, mare, v'reach ein bei mamish. Halachically, voice and an image and a smell have no substance. You can't touch them. Now, of course, in physics, it's more complicated than that. In other words, how you juxtapose, how you reconcile, how physics understands what sound is, how physics understands what smell is, and how physics even understands what sight is, how it's in line with this halacha, the keil mare v'reach ein bei mamish, is complicated, and it really deserves an analysis of an expert. And when I say an expert, I really mean a rebbe. This is not something which a common person can do, and I would imagine that someplace in Hasidus this is explored. But there is this notion of Mamashes of substance. Physical things are substantive, you can touch them. And sound and sight and smell, you cannot touch, they have no substance. Now, when it comes to smell, for example, there's something called zeya, which means that if you have a smell which is associated with a mist, moisture, right? And that's exactly what smell is. Smell is actually carrying its material, carrying through the air in such a small physical volume that it seems like nothing, but it's actually a reach. It's actually a zeya, a mist. So in halacha, zeya yesh bei mamish. So it becomes tricky. What is the end of reach and what is the beginning of zeya? But nevertheless, smell halachically has no substance. And the same is true of sound, and the same is true of sight. So it says in Zohar, why? So let's talk only about sound. Our topic is koil. We're not going to talk about re'iyah and rech, just about koil. Because as in Zohar, because it's made up of emer, eish, mayim, and ruach, it's missing offer. So the Sefer Yetzirah's model that revolves around 3 things, olam shana nefesh, is the same model that revolves around the 3 ideas of emesh, aver, mayim, eish, ruach, and mayim. There's no offer. In other words, the Sefer Yetzirah has a unique model of creation, and the entire Sefer Yetzirah goes in the number 3, which is its model of creation. But you need to understand that when the Sefer Yetzirah gives us the model of creation, the Sefer Yetzirah is speaking only about the ruchnias, not about the mamashes. In other words, the idea that the Sefer Yetzirah describes everything as going in 3 is really saying that the Sefer Yetzirah speaks only about the spirituality of the reality, not about its matter, not about its material. And there's a Zohar which explains how you reconcile the Sefer Yetzirah with what we know, that you have to have 4 elements, not 3. Eish, ruach, mayim, and offer. The mamashes, the substances in the offer, like it's described in the beginning of the Gersa Kedesh, Simin Tezvov, that the eish, ruach, and mayim are very small part of the volume of a piece of wood. Most of the volume of the piece of wood is offer, and through the offer, the eish, ruach, and the mayim also are tangible. This is brought in Ranat. I saw it in 2 places. I saw it in Ranat and in 1 other place. That they bring the Zohar, that the Zohar says, Golid be'esha v'kovish beruch, that if you have only 3 elements, fire, wind, and water, air and water. If you have fire, wind, and water, you take a pot, you put the water in the pot, and you cook it. In order for the fire to burn, you have to have air. So the air is feeding the fire, which is boiling the water. That's eish, mayim, and ruach. If you boil the water out completely, and the pot becomes totally empty, you'll see dust. So it says in Hasidus, based on the Zohar, explaining the Sefer Yetzirah, that if you take the 3 elements and you remove their ruchnias, their qualities, you find gashmias. This is a mashal for the idea of me'es avas e'er nas akeli. In other words, the Sefer Yetzirah speaks only about 3. Because the Sefer Yetzirah concerned itself only with the Ruchnius of the creation, not with the Metzias, the Chaymer of the creation. But the truth is that if you examine those three closely, you'll find the fourth. In the fire, wind, and the water, there is already earth, which is what we call in our culture the keli, the vessel, or the chaymer, the matter, or the guf, the body. You have to just extract it. So the Sefer Yetzirah's model of creation concerns itself primarily only with the ruach. Now there were Tanoim and Amiroyim who once created a behemoth from Sefer Yetzirah. They used Sefer Yetzirah to create an animal, and the animal that they created, they actually shechted and made a brach on it, and they ate it, which meant that they were able to touch it. So they somehow extracted from the Sefer Yetzirah not just Ruchnius, Eish, Mayim, and Ruach, but Ofed as well. But in the Sefer Yetzirah's world, you concern yourself only with the Ruchnius, and the Ruchnius is an automatic byproduct of the Gashmis, automatic byproduct of the Ruchnius. So the Sefer Yetzirah's focusing on three is focusing on what we call in our culture Giluyim, the aspects of godliness that are meaningful. It does the aspects of reality that are meaningful, even though the meaning has to be juxtaposed with something physical. For example, if you have the great visual, you have to put it on a canvas. If you have a great piece of music, it has to come out using musical instruments and an audible sound. And the same is true of everything. Everything has to have a body, but the Sefer Yetzirah is not concerned itself with the body, it concerns itself only with the ruach, with the spirit. Now understand that when you discuss this, and you say that the Sefer Yetzirah concerns itself only with Ruchnius, with three, and that the fourth element, the earth, is automatically included in the three. If you just boil out the water using air, what will be left will be dust. There's two ways of looking at that fourth element. The dust, the guf, the chaymer. One is that the fourth element is lower than the three, which is the obvious way to look at it. The body, the matter, is nothing. It's just existence. And the meaning of the existence, the purpose of the existence, the usefulness of the existence, the uniqueness of the existence is in the Eish, Ruach, and Mayim. All matter is the same. All form are different. When you impose different form or different matter, you have different themes. So the matter is simply a body that's carrying a soul. But alternatively, it's true that the source of the matter is higher than the Ruchnius. We call in our culture Atzmas. In other words, the fourth element, which the way it's manifesting is lower than the three, in its source is higher than the three. Because if you have no reality, if no matter, there is no place for the Kel, the Mara, and the Reach to have a Metzias. There's no place for the Ruchnius to be manifest. So both things are true. That the Sefer Yetzirah goes in the number three. And from the three comes a fourth. And that fourth is lower than the three in its manifestation, and it's higher than the three in its source. So getting to the Maamar, our Maamar also speaks about Sefer Yetzirah, and how Sefer Yetzirah speaks everything in the number three. But the three are not fire, wind, and water. The three are time, space, and life. Nefesh, Ruach, Eilam, Shana, Nefesh. What is there in addition to time, space, and life, or life, time, and space? In addition to life and time and space, there's a body. The body that holds the soul, that exists in space and journeys through time. That's the fourth element. And when you have Olam Shana Nefesh, you have life, and you have time, and you have space, which is manifest in a body, then you have a reality. On Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol, who's the holiest person, Nefesh, went into the holiest place, which is Mokim, on the holiest day, which is Zman. But the bottom line is, there was an actual Kohen Gadol going to an actual Kohen Yom Kippurim on an actual Kedesh HaKadoshim, an actual Yom Kippurim. That actual is the fourth element. Now, I'm not saying that this is the pshat of Achas. I'm not saying that. Achas is a Ruchniistic thing. It's an Atzmiistic thing. It's much higher than that. But it's nevertheless similar. Right? You think Yom Kippur, you have three things. Olam Shana Nefesh. You always have three things. Olam Shana Nefesh. Yom Kippur, you bring the Achas into the Olam Shana Nefesh. The Yechida, the Eibishter. The one into life, the one into time, the one into space. But you see, when this Achas, this Yechida is added to Oshan, to life and time and space, on the one hand, obviously the Achas is much, much higher. But on the other hand, the Achas is all about manifesting it actually. One of the things which is so important to Hasidus, and to be sure, it's so important for us to get, is why it is that in Yiddishkeit the only thing that matters is action. It seems so counterintuitive. Shouldn't ideas be more important than actions? Shouldn't spirituality be more important than material? And the answer is absolutely not. No. The most important thing is the physical body. The most important thing is the physical act. The most important thing is the physical item or artifact with which I do a mitzvah, like a lulav or an esrog. Why? Why? Because I'm completing godliness. Godliness in the number 3 is incomplete. It's ruchnius. It's like sound. Ein be mamish. The completion of godliness is its physical manifestation. And of course, the old principle that something falls lower, it has a higher source, speaks to this, that if we take the ruchnius of Yom Kippur, the holiest person, the holiest day, the holiest time, and bring it down to the physical world, it's because we reached higher than those 3. In other words, the idea that the Sefer Yetzirah speaks in 3s, Emer, Eish, Maim, and Ruach, Ava, Maim, Eish, which is no substance. And how this happens in the physical world because of the element, the 4th element. Then offer is because the Shadish is higher. So I'm repeating myself a second time. I'm not saying that's the Pashat, the Pshat, and the Maimir. That the idea that Yom Kippur, and the Rebbe wants to say the same thing about Rosh Hashanah, and he certainly is going to say the same thing about Sukkot, is that the idea is revealing the high level above the 3, so that it comes down into the reality which is beneath the 3 into the Gashmias. But it's certainly very similar to what the Rebbe is saying. And especially when it comes to Sukkot. In other words, this Maimir is going to say that there's 3, and the 3 is inspired with the Achas. There's 3, and the 3 are inspired with the Achas on Rosh Hashanah. There's 3, and the 3 is inspired with the Achas on Yom Kippur. And the 3 is inspired with the Achas on Chag HaSukkos. But on Sukkot it's called Bakesel Yem Chagenu. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur it's hidden, and on Sukkot it's revealed, and the point is revelation. So you know the full Achas when it's Be'ezgalas on Sukkot. Or to say it in different words, the idea of Achas is more complete on Sukkot than at any other time because it's manifest in the world. Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah are very holy times. But Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah are very holy times on a spiritual dimension. The culmination of the Yom HaNeroyim, the culmination of Tishrei is Sukkot, because Sukkot, you see it physically. You see it physically in the joy of Sukkot. You see it physically in the walls and the schach of the Sukkah. You see it physically in the shaking the lulav. And as you'll see in the Mami, you see it physically in the 70 cows that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash to represent the 70 nations of the world. So I gave you a lecture. And in this lecture, I shared with you ideas which are not in the Maimed, and they're really not necessary for the Maimed. But I believe that they enhance what the spirit of the Maimed is. That there's 3, and then there's a 4th. That 4th is higher than the 3, and the symptom, the proof that 4 is higher than the 3 is that it comes lower than the 3. And this is more on Sukkot than Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So if Shagisi, if I'm wrong, if I made a correlation which is incorrect, I apologize for that. But certainly on a level of limud, this is helpful in understanding what's going to be happening in the Maimid. And if I'm right, then I gave you clarity about what the Maimid is. Now we're going to start to read inside. Let me tell you something cute. Avart. My father, Zozan Gesund Stark, told me that when he was a bacher, like all other Chassidish bachim, he would go Chazach Chassidus in the shuls. Chazach Chassidus in the shuls, Chazar and Dach. And in those days, they actually Chazad Maimorim. In other words, when we were going to shuls, Chazad Siches. But in the early years, they pushed Chazad Maimorim from the Rabbeim, and it was a big problem to find a Maimah that you can Chazad in a shul, and people should be able to understand it, etc. So my father asked the Rebbe in Yechidus, that if you Chazad Maimah in a shul, if you can say Hezber, if you can explain it. Because when you say the Maimah as it is, people don't know what you're talking about. So the Rebbe told him, Bazeh Alosh, a Maimah darf man sagen, wie steht. Hezber kann man sagen, oder früher oder später. Which means in English, the Maimah you should say as it's written. You want to explain it, either explain it before or explain it after. It's a very sweet answer. A Maimah darf man sagen, wie steht. Hezber kann man sagen, oder früher oder später. The Maimah you have to say as it's written. You'll explain it before or after. So that's what I just did. I spent now about 15 minutes. We didn't start learning. And I gave you an introduction to the Maimah to explore this statement from the Tzemach Tzedek that Ashleish and Yonim Eilam Nivna Kol Sefer Yetzira Oshon Eilam Shon and Nefesh. Now we're reading it inside. It says the Heilig Rabbi Paltiel now, based on the aforementioned. And what is the aforementioned? The aforementioned is that there's a concept called Bakesel Yom Chagenu, that the themes of the different Yomim Tevim of Tishrei are really the same. There's the Avodah of Shofar Rosh Hashanah, which is 100 Kailes. There's the Avodah of the Anan, Ketelos and Yom Kippur, the whole Kedesh HaKadoshim is filled with smoke. And there's the Avodah of that cloud of smoke, of the Ketelos on Yom Kippur, and the Kedesh HaKadoshim becoming the Schach of the Sukkah, because we sit in the Sukkah, because Basukos Tashvu Be'etz Mitzrayim, because the Yidden sat in their Nani Yaakov when they went out of Mitzrayim, and that the remez of Schach is also 100 Samach, Chof Chof, which is reminiscent of the 100 kills of Rosh Hashanah. So the Rebbe showed us how Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot have the same essence. The idea of 100, which envelops and surrounds us, and this is really a union of Yechidah. But on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's Bakesa, it's concealed, and on Sukkot, it's the Yom Chagenu, it's revealed. It says the Rebbe, Pihanal Yuvan Abir Vanakudash B'chol and Yanam Amurim. We now see the point, the constant in these three ideas. What's the constant in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? The following. Let's start with Yom Kippur. The reason he starts with Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur is the most obvious one. What's done on Yom Kippur in the Holy of Holies is Bazman. It happens in the time. Because of Achaz, Bashana is called the date in the year which is called Achaz. And I believe that Rebbe brings a Tais a Menachas, that Achaz goes on Yechida, right? On page Lamed Zayin of this Maimed, there's a footnote 51, and if you look inside, it says Achat Perus Yechida Kedisa B'Teisves, a Teisves Menachas, a Gemara Nigla the Teira, that speaks about Achaz being Yechida, the highest level of the Neshama. So there's Achaz B'Shonah, it's called the Chumash, the day and the year which is Achaz. That's Bechinas Achaz B'Nefesh B'Makom. Yom Kippur is, like any other moment, a time and a place and a person. But all three is on a level of Achaz. Shavei, the Nasa, the Kayin, Gadol, the work is about the Kayin, Gadol, the high priest, Shuham HaKudosh, Bechinas Achaz, Shabam Yisrael. He's the holiest, and he's the Achaz in the Jewish people. Like it says in the Pasuk, Hashem separates him to be halified on the level of Holy of Holies, and there's only Kayin Gadol Lecha. The Rebbe brings in the Sichos that Keirach wanted to be a Kayin Gadol. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Keirach, Gam ani reitze bekach, I also want to be a Kayin Gadol. But in the Jewish people, there's Kayin Gadol Achas, there's only one Kayin Gadol. What is the Kayin Gadol? V'yashav sham kol yimei chayav. The Kayin Gadol is supposed to sit in the Beis HaMikdash all day and learn Torah and bring karbanos. His life is holiness. No other Jew has that distinction, and if I may add, no other Jew has a right to have that distinction. You're not supposed to be a Kayin Gadol. Only one person is supposed to be a Kayin Gadol. Everybody else is supposed to be out in the world making a dira leis barach, etc., etc., etc. So the Achas and Nefesh is dafke one person. He's the Kayin Gadol whose physical life is lived on a level of the highest levels of piety, on the highest level of holiness, and he represents the theme of Achas Yechida in the life of the nation, of the Jewish people. And then he continues, Aveda B'Kedesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies is the place. HaMokam HaMakudesh B'Chol HaElam Kula, the holiest place in the whole world. Gam Mokam Mimokam HaKedesh Beis HaMikdash HaEchel. Even though the whole of the sanctuary, the entire Beis HaMikdash is holy, the Kedesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, is the holiest of those places, and that's the Achas in Mokam. And of course, just like you have the Achas in Nefesh and Achas in Mokam, you have the idea of Achas in Zman. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Says the Rebbe, these three ideas, time, life, time, space, and how in each one of these three we're infusing the Achas, the Yechida. Says the Rebbe, the entire Seder Ishtalshus is constructed of three. It comes from the highest levels to the lowest levels. And the Rebbe says, it is based on these three, and I'm surprised that there's no Maamar to a Maimah from Tzemach Tzedek, or the older Rabbeim used to quote the Tzemach Tzedek and say that all of Nivn is called Sefer Yetzira. So Tzarachi and Godel, maybe in Tov Shalom Ches the stuff Pasha were not printed yet. Why the Rebbe doesn't bring a mocker for this statement that Kol Sefer Yetzira is named on these three inyanim of Elam Shal Nefesh and Oshan? But understand what the Rebbe is saying. If the whole Seder Ishtalshus is Elam Shal Nefesh, it's the same thing as saying the whole Seder Ishtalshus is Ruchnias. It's like saying that Seder Shtashas is Seichel and Midas and the Chushim. There's no goof. And we know that that's not the case. Not only know that that's not the case, we know that it's not even the most important case. The most important case is the Gashmias. But the Sefer Yetzirah's focuses on the Ruchnias, and how the Ruchnias manifests in the Gashmias is, so to speak, to the Sefer Yetzirah byproduct. Our Maimir is going to speak about what's higher than the three, Achas. And I'm suggesting that because the Maimir speaks about the Achas, which is higher than the three, it ultimately brings down to Bakesel, the Yemech Agenu, the Achas, which is lower than the three, the world, the Gashmias, the Gilur. Ad Lekmei Shabriyim Atmas Amhus, this goes till the way creation comes from Eibishter himself. And of course, the Rebbe wants to focus on the idea that we call Yesh HaAmiti, the true ego, which is the Eibishter himself, which is the source of ego we see in creation, reality we see in creation. It says in Tanya Negeres Zakedesh Chof, the so-called essence of the Eibishter himself is he exists only from himself. Most existences, and certainly most creations, are dependent. We need other things for our existence. We need other things for our sustenance. We need our other things for the continuation of our reality. Hashem needs nothing. He exists only from himself. And that's why he's a yesh. He's a real entity. He exists because of himself. And when you see yeshus in creation, it's a symptom of the Eibishter's yesh. There is no cause to come. The definition of God is nobody made him. It's the meaning. And when you ask the question, yeah, but who made him? The answer is nobody made him. That's the taich. And the Rebbe says that therefore, who lavadi only he has the strength and the ability to bring something into the state of yeshus. And in the language of this Maimah, to give it a goof. So the Sefer Yetzirah speaks about Ruchnias, Emesh, Emer, Oshon. There's the Achas, which is higher than the three, which goes on Atmas Amhus, which is responsible for the Achas, which is lower than the three, the Yeshus, the Gashmias. So the Rebbe says, V'hu Inyan Achas Bashonu. Yom Kippur is called the day of Achas, and the place of Achas, and the soul of Achas, the life of Achas. In each case, the Achas, its Inyan, is much, much higher than the Oshon, but as a consequence, it comes down into Yeshus, which is much, much lower than the Oshon. Be'elam, which is Makim, B'shana, Be'elam, which is Makim, B'nefesh. In other words, Shem is Ach, there's Yacha, they all join together. Ba'aved, there's Kayin Gadol, B'yem HaKippurim, HaKedesh, the work done by the Kayin Gadol, on Yom Kippur, the Holy of Holies. But the three Ruchnis, the components of life and time and space, Kayin Gadol, Yom Kippur, and Kedesh HaKadoshim converge with Bechinas Atmos Musi Yizbarach, which is higher than the three, the idea of Achas, and which I am suggesting is also Nimshach lower than the three. In other words, Bechinas Atmos Musi Yizbarach Shnimshach, Bechinas Ashon, how Atmos Mos the Eibishter himself, who's the source of Yeshus HaGashmias, joins with the three of Ashon. It's true of Yom Kippur. Now, why did the Rebbe start with Yom Kippur? Because this is conventional, everybody knows this. But the Rebbe is going to say it's not just true of Yom Kippur, it's true also of Sukkot, and it's also true of Rosh Hashanah. But correlating the notion of Oshan plus Achas, the Achas which is higher than the Yoshan, and then the Achas which is lower than the Yashan, to Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah, that takes work. In other words, it's not written Meferish, it's certainly not written Meferish in a Pasuk, and this is why the Rebbe first talks about Yom Kippur, then he's going to talk about the other two. Here goes Sukkot. Sukkot comes into Sukkot. It says in the Mishnah, the work, the order of the work done by the Holy, by the Kain Gadol, Yom Kippur, and the Kedesh HaKadosh. Shakain Gadol Imamte, the Kedesh HaKadosh, and Gadol had to wait in the Holy of Holies when the Holy of Holies was filled with smoke. Then he would depart. He had to create this cloud, and this cloud, this vapor, which again, as I said before, Ein Bei Mamish. It's a ruchnistic thing, it's Eish Ma'im Ruach, there's no offer, is going to become the schach of the sukkah. Says the Rebbe, Omei Oshan Zeh, Shemei the B'chinas Achas, become the schach of the sukkah. So just like on Yom Kippur, you have three, and then you have the fourth, that three, and then the fourth is going to become the three, and then the fourth. On Sukkot, the fourth would be the schach, the Gashmias of the schach. Now later in the Maimah, you're going to see what it is on Sukkot. What's the fourth element? Sukkot is going to call it Kol HaEzrach B'Yisrael Yeshu B'Sukkot. This is going to be the Achas of Sukkot, the fourth idea, which, as I keep on telling you, has a higher source, and it brings it down even lower. But now the Rebbe goes back to Rosh Hashanah. Just like Yom Kippur, you have 3 plus achas. On Sukkot, there's 3 plus achas. Time, space, and matter. By the way, this is the teretz to the kasha that the Rebbe asked on the bottom of page Lamed, which bothered me. How come by Sukkot he mentions the day of Mokum? Now you understand why, because he wants to argue that in Sukkot also there's a convergence of Nefesh and Zman and Shana and Olam, of life and time and space. Of course, the time is Sukkot, the space is where you're able to build a sukkah, and the soul is the person who builds the sukkah and sits in the sukkah, and he's mamshach the achas into sukkahs, like it says, called Ezech B'Yisrael Yeshu B'Sukkahs. However, it starts with Rosh Hashanah. Now he goes back. Just like on Yom Kippur, you have 3 plus achas. On Sukkot, you also have 3 plus achas, but in the state of a Kesel Yom Chagein. And similarly, on Rosh Hashanah, you also have 3 plus achas. Tchilas Aved Bechinas Achas, but Rosh Hashanah, it all starts with Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah is also the idea of time, space, and life, but how achas, yechid, is brought into time, space, and life. We make Hashem to be a king. The fact that Hashem is a king by himself is immaterial. Hashem is Adein Elam Asher Molach, but Terem Kol Yitzur Nivra, it doesn't help us. Because as being a king by himself means we have no relationship with his kingship. And the very definition of kingship is the relationship between the subjects and the king, like I gave in my shir this morning in the Shefer classes, Ein Melech B'Layam. So you have to crown him. He should become our king, the king over the world. The Hainu, that Kemei Shehu B'Bchinas Atzmi, even though there's a concept of Hashem being a king by himself, it shouldn't remain that way, but the king it is by himself should come down into revelation. Hashem should become our king. And as I explained to you in the shir this morning, the rule of Melucha is that kingship is based on will. But there are 2 wills. The will of the king to agree to be a king, and the will of the subjects to arouse in him that desire. And the same is true in the relationship between Yidden and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to develop a will within ourselves that Hashem should then will to become our king. And this kingship, this is the B'chin of Achas. This is the Yechida, which comes down into Oshan, just like he does on Yom Kippur. First of all, Hashem becomes the king of the Jewish people. Because we're king over the whole world. And this is the Amshacha into Oshan. Hashem is being a king, doesn't remain locked away in a closet, in a base medrash, in a shtibel during the holy hours of Rosh Hashanah, when people are watching, so to speak, the Rebbe blow shofar. But it comes down into the whole world. That coming down to the whole world is the joining of the Achas, of the Tkiyah Shefer with Oshan. And as I said before, the very definition of kingship is that there's will. The person wills Hashem into being a king, and he arouses in Hashem a willingness to be the king. It's now that he's a dictator over the world. Being a dictator, being a political leader. Rather than a king, you could do it willfully, you could agree with your dictator, with your leader, but you also disagree. Why? Because the relationship is based on coercion. Not necessarily physical coercion, but coercion. You're doing what you do because he's compelling you to do it. So there's no ratzon on your part, and there's no ratzon on his part. Avol Yisrael Avedosam. When Yidden do the work of Malchus, say beratzon kibaleim, they make Hashem a king. And the foundation of making him a king is the inyan of ratzon. Mamshichin b'chol ha'masiyas kula. They bring into the whole reality. B'chol say that it starts with all the steps and all the order of creation. That all of the creation should come and should kneel and should prostrate themselves. Because who made us. So Rosh Hashanah also has a combination of Oshan and Yechida. Oshan means the Ruchnis, the Kinyarim of Rosh Hashanah, time, space, and life. And the Yechida means the cry of the Sheif, which makes Hashem into a Melech. And joining them together as they make Hashem into a Melech, and you see it in the world. Stop. Yom Kippur, whatever Rosh Hashanah is, comes into Pnimis. And this I talked about in yesterday's class. I don't know what it means. I never saw it in a Maimer. But Yechida is revealed in Rosh Hashanah b'derech Makiv. And whatever that Makiv is in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it's b'chinas Pnimis. And then he says, then comes the holiday of Sukkot, that Bo Hamshacha Begilui, whatever 3 fused by Achas, which is the fact that in Rosh Hashanah we blow shofar, and whatever 3 which is fused by achas, as it's manifest on Yom Kippur. Then comes Begoli b'Chag HaSukkos. Sukkos, you see the three, time, space, and life, and you see the achas, whatever the achas is. The achas is the simcha, the achas is the achdus. But whatever the achas is, it's manifest Begoli and Chag HaSukkos. Shanitzochin shehoya b'Reish Hashanah, the victory the Jewish people experienced Rosh Hashanah. Hachel me'anitzochin, beginning with the victory, first of all, Shem mi melech Yisrael nimshach liyis u'mechusa b'kel mashallah. Number one, he agreed to be a king. Number two, by becoming a king over the Jewish people, ultimately he becomes a king over the entire creation. Well, the Mahalui said, to be sure, Gam malchus sebiras and that even goyim lahavdol accept Hashem as a king by will. So this idea that the Yid make Hashem into a king by will. That's the beginning of the Gili of Melech. Then there's that this will for the Eibush Melech is imposed on goyim, but it could be imposed on goyim b'derech memshala. So he's only a king over Yid and over the goyim. He's a Moshel of a Shalit. And then there's the idea that all the nations of the world accept Hashem willingly. And this is the Gili of Rosh Hashanah. This is the Gili of Malchus. Or in other words, this is the Gili of Achas and Oshan. Where do you see in time, space, and life? The Nikud of Achas, which is Malchus, when you see even Goyim accepting Hashem as a king willfully. It comes down into the whole world and all 70 nations, which is why in Sukkot they're makach ayin padim keneged ayin umas. They brought Kabbalah to represent all the nations of the world to preserve them. As the Rebbe is going to say in the bottom of this page, the famous lashon from Chazal, that if Goyim knew what the Beis Hamikdash did for them, they would surround it and protect it. So now, we have two things. Number one, we have three, and number two, we have achas. In Rosh Hashanah, the three is time, space, and life, and the achas is the tamluchuni aleichem. And it doesn't remain theoretical. It happens actually to Yidden and Lahavdil, even to Goyim. Number two, the Achas, which is connected to Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is also three, and then Achas is brought into Yom Kippur. And number three in Sukkot. And by Sukkot also, all this is Behis Galus. It says the Rebbe Vayter on page Lamed Hey, it's about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. V'hinei Amshachas Dunam Shachas Begili. The whole point is that these revelations shouldn't remain theoretical and concealed. They should be revealed. First of all, Ba'adal Yom Mishben Yom Kippurim L'Sukkos, and the 4 days between Yom Kippur, as I explained to you yesterday morning or 2 days ago, that it's called B'Shem Hashem. It's called Dal Deis as the Shem Havaya. It's the Tshuva of Shuv, to bring the Eibishter into the world. Says the Rebbe Tchila, the first place where you see in the world that Hashem is the Melech is B'Teiru Mitzvah and Teiru Mitzvahs. That Aidei Limud Hilches Sukkah, when one learned the laws of Sukkah, one learns the laws of the 4 kinds of Dalad Minim. When a person learns the laws of the Sukkah and learns the laws of the Esrig, even though he's in exile, he's not in a position to fulfill this mitzvah completely for all kinds of reasons. Just learning about it, the facts that it should be by learning about the Sukkah and learning about the lulav, it's if we have it. So in Torah, there's already a Gila. Just learning is already an Indian. Before Yom Tov, you learn the halachas of Yom Tov. Learning the halachas of Yom Tov constitutes a Gila. However, it's not enough. First of all, it's revealed in Torah. It comes into action, which is the actual sukkah, the actual lulav, the actual essay, the actual hadar, the actual harav. He skip the bracket. It comes down into the entirety of the world beyond the Jewish people. In other words, the whole world sees, not just the Jewish people see. How? The Jews doing the mitzvahs. And how the mitzvahs that the Yid is doing is not only not bad for the Goy, it's good for the Goy. And maybe it's even a bracha for the Goy. Says in the Medrash, the nations of the world would know if the base, how much the base Mikdash is beautiful for them. Yaf means beautiful. They would appoint an armed guard. They would appoint mercenaries to stand around the base of Mikdash in full army gear, to guard it, because the base of Mikdash is a bracha for the whole world. Let's do the last words on page Lamed. This effect, the Mikdash al ha'umes, influence of the Beis Hamikdash on the whole world. He b'chag Sukkot is on Sukkot, which is be'efen goli. And he says again, "Ayin parim which connected Ayin umas, like it says in Midrash Chazal. So what I am suggesting is that the Rebbe is arguing that you have Achas plus Osha in Rosh Hashanah, you have Achas plus Osha in Yom Kippur, and you have Achas plus Osha in Sukkot. But the Achas plus Osha in Sukkot is more than the Achas plus Osha in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur because it's Begolah. Leim Chagin. And the Rebbe continues, V'hini apiha now that we introduced ourselves to the idea of Achas, which is Yechida, and we introduced ourselves to the idea of Osha, which is Zman, in Nefesh, Zman, Mokim, and the fusion and the Isgaus between the two that takes place in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Says the Rebbe Shein, Yena Sukkah Shaykh Lebechenes Achas B'Shano Be'elam B'Makam B'Nefesh. It has to do with the reality of the world, right? That Sukkot is connected to the idea of Shana, of time, and Elam means space, and Nefesh means soul. How the Achas has brought all into them. Moving Gamkin, it's understood. Much benigay, Yela Sukkot Davka Nem, and why Sukkot is written, Kola Ezech B'Yisrael Yeshua Sukkot. That on Sukkot, every citizen of the Jewish people lives in the Sukkah, and of course, Kola Ezech B'Yisrael means the Gili of Yechida. The Rebbe is going to say later that this is Be'ikeli Yosed Lo. The question at the beginning of the Maamar was that the words Basukos Tashvu Shivas Yom, and then the immediately following words called Ezech B'Yisrael Yeshua Sukkot is the same thing 2 times. And now he tells you why. Because Basukos Tashvu Shivas Yom is the end of Oshan. Called Ezech B'Yisrael Yeshua Sukkot is how you bring Echad into Oshan. The Gemara says all the Jews are worthy of sitting in Sukkah Achas. So Chassidus is going to explain the Sukkah on the Madrega of Achas. And the Rebbe is going to argue that mostly this is Liyosed Lave. All Jews fit into the same Sukkah means the Sukkah is time, the Sukkah is space, the Sukkah is life. And Achas is the union of Yechidah, which is higher, which brings it lower. On Sukkot, you reveal the Achas in the most revealed way. And not from Basukos Tashvu, and the Rebbe goes into a Kabbalah hezbollah. I'm about 6 lines into the big paragraph on page Lamed Vav, and I learned in total of 2 lines. There's 2 pages. Right? Yesterday I learned 4.5. Today we learned Mamish 2. I'm going to stop now because this sheet is almost an hour long. I guess it's 40 minutes long, 45 minutes long. And tonight at 8 o'clock, I'm going to give you a 3rd sheet. And I'm going to learn Lamed Vav and Lamed Zayin and Lamed Ches. And then tomorrow morning, I wasn't planning on it, I'm going to give you a 4th sheet where we'll explore the end of the Maamar, which is long. It's 5 Amudim, but Lacheda it's easier. Okay? I'll see you then. So again, today at 8 is going to be a 3rd sheet on the Maamar, and I'm not teaching what I thought yesterday to teach, which is the last third of the Maamar. I'm teaching the second half of this